The only little good things you do, they make me no. This distance is taking a hold of me for sure. Baby, come.
Hi guys, welcome back to A Glimpse of Ray. My name's Rachel, I go by Ray, and if you're new here, I am married and have been for 7 years. We are a blended family, but we share 3 kids together, ages 4, 5, and 6. They are all on the spectrum along with other special needs that they have, all within the family of autism, ADHD, speech delays, um, global developmental delay, intellectual disability. It's just a long list of things. So I'm going to get straight to the point, as always. Today, I'm going to talk about our experience with therapies that our kids have received and how it has affected them and how it has helped them. So for reference, all 3 of my boys have gotten ABA, speech therapy, and occupational therapy. How we went about getting these therapies is when they were first diagnosed and the doctor that evaluated and diagnosed them sent back in their report to the insurance. They recommended those therapies. And so how therapy started for our kids did not go through the regional center. I get asked that a lot. They did not. They went through their insurance. Doctor sends back in their report, and then their insurance just picked a company, and then that company reached out to us at some point. First off, I just do want to say that if your child is on the spectrum or has any other special needs and they do receive therapy, a lot of parents don't know how much of a say-so that they have. Whether it comes to the therapist, the programs that their child is receiving, and the programs that they work on, what the therapist can and cannot do, what the company can and cannot do, the amount of hours that their child gets. A lot of parents don't know how much of a say-so that they have. If a company wants to give your child too many hours, for example, if it's ABA and they want to give your child too many hours, you can say no. It took me a while to learn that and to know that, because when your child is first diagnosed and everything kind of happens so fast, like I said, everything is happening fast. So it's a lot to take in. You don't know how much of a say-so that you have, but and it can be a little intimidating, but you do have a say-so. And like I said, a lot of parents don't know that. So first things first, ABA. My now 6-year-old was diagnosed at the age of 2, and if you saw my video a few videos back, I'm talking about Trey. Trey is now 6, but he was diagnosed at the age of 2. He was diagnosed in September of 2020. He started receiving ABA by November of 2020. So for Trey, him being 2 at the time, they were originally trying to start him off with like 30 hours, I think, a week. It was like 30 or 40 hours. I feel like it was really close. It was somewhere between 35 and 40 hours a week. And I felt like that was a lot. And like I said, everything was happening so fast that it was very intimidating. I didn't really know what I could and could not do, what I could and could not say. All I knew was that a therapist would come out 5 days a week, and that the amount of hours that he would receive would add up to between 35 and 40 hours a week. It took me some time because I felt like that was a lot for a 2-year-old. And it took me some time, but eventually I did end up finding out from my other son's therapist that I don't have to do that amount of hours if I don't want to. And she actually taught me a lot regarding my say-so and the say-so that I do have and did have at that time. At first, Trey was told that he would get 35 to 40 hours a week. And then there was Tyler, who is now 5, but at the time was diagnosed at the age of 1. They wanted to give him somewhere between 25 to 30 hours a week. It felt like a lot. Like it didn't make sense to me how someone so young would get that amount of hours for a week. Also, having someone come into your house and be there that long, like I said, it was just a lot. I had just had a baby, so it was just overwhelming. ABA also stands for Applied Behavior Analysis. In my experience, what they usually work on is obviously things of the behavior, But things like for Trey, where he didn't and still kind of struggles with knowing how to interact with other kids. So they kind of teach you those things. They kind of teach you how to redirect your behavior when meltdowns are about to happen or are happening. They work on things like self harming behavior. They work on things like how to play appropriately with toys. If you saw my last video with Tristan, when he was diagnosed, he had a lot of trouble with knowing how to play with toys appropriately. And it was always focusing on one specific thing of the toy, of whatever he had. So they work on things like that. Sometimes they work on potty training, depending on the company. Every company is different. So they'll work on things in that field and like life skills mostly. At some point, going so long with them receiving therapies, I had to tell them what I was and what not okay with. So I had to tell them I'm not okay with things like them using food as a reward. I've never been okay with that. Oh, if you do this, then you can have this snack. I've never been a fan of that. That's just me personally. Always express that if my kid says no, then that just simply means no. As far as they're allowed to give consent. If they don't want to be touched, then you can't touch them. That's just simple as that. I don't feel like just because kids are kids that they are not allowed to give consent in some form, especially when it comes to physical touch. My kids don't have to hug you. They don't have to allow hand over hand. If they're expressing in a way that they don't like that, then it's your job to figure out another way to go about it. That's just how I see it, and others may see it differently. So with all three of our kids, we've gone through obviously quite a bit of therapists, because like I said, the two older ones have been receiving therapy since the end of 2020, and then Tristan started receiving therapy somewhere in 2021. I've gone through quite a bit of therapists and quite a bit of therapy companies. In my experience, some companies do like it more when they could just tell you what you're going to do with your child. And I'm not one of those people that you could tell me what you're going to do with my child. I speak up often, and sometimes they don't like that, and I'm okay with that. At the end of the day, you are your child's biggest advocate. And there was one company that Trey was with, and I remember they told Trey's therapist that we were a difficult case. And to be labeled as that is not surprising. You know, if you're a Black woman, it doesn't, that's kind of what you're used to. That doesn't make it okay, but that's kind of what you're used to. But we were labeled as a difficult case because they knew they couldn't tell me what they were going to do with my child. And I was very expressive of what I was okay with and what I'm not okay with. And I know at the end of the day, if I was another color, I would not have been labeled difficult. I can also be petty. So once I've known of that they referred to us as that, I became that. I became that difficult case that you guys now have already labeled me of, because I wasn't difficult before. Before I was just advocating. But since in your eyes that's difficult, I'm gonna be exactly that. So I did address the person that said that, because it was a higher up in the company. So I did address them as far as that, and I did tell them if I was another race, you wouldn't have called me that. And of course, she backtracked, but you know, it's something that I'm used to, and it's not the only challenge that I've faced. So it was nothing new to me. We've had therapists that have came for our kids that was very, very new to that job field. A lot of parents don't know that they can fire a therapist. I had one therapist come, and whenever a new therapist would come, I always start the conversation off with, oh, like, how long have you been doing this and what made you want to get into this? Because you can always tell those kind of people that genuinely love what they do, and the people that do it to get by. You could tell. So I remember asking one therapist, like, oh, what made you want to do this? And she was like, oh, I used to babysit. So my friend was like, oh, you should give this a try. And so I just tried it. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I remember one day she was working with Trey. That's who she came for. But Tyler was across the room closer to her, and he was banging his head against the wall very hard. And at the time, my ankle was broke. So she just kind of stood there. She didn't stop him. She didn't put her hand behind his head. She didn't put a pillow behind his head. She didn't try to block him from um, banging his head. She didn't do anything. She just stood there. And it's not like she was dealing with Trey and that's why she didn't respond to Tyler. It's just a matter of, it does not matter which kid that you're coming for. If you see any kid that is harming themselves, automatically, common sense, you stop that child. But she did nothing. And so by the end of the session, I told her, hey, this is not going to work out. I'm letting you know first before I reach out to the company, because I don't want you to go home and think everything was fine. And then you get a call from the company tomorrow and you don't know why I'm saying that I no longer want you here. So I'm going to let you know. I don't feel like our family is a good fit. And it's okay for a parent to tell a therapist that. If you don't feel like your child and the therapist is a good fit, that's okay to let that therapist know that. And so I told her, I will let the office know. I told her I didn't like the fact that my son was banging his head, and obviously you would have been able to get to him before I could because my ankle was broke, and you chose to stand there and do nothing. And she admitted to me that she kind of froze, that she didn't really have a lot of training, so she didn't know what to do. And sometimes the companies will send the therapist out into the field and they don't train them that much. But something like that, I don't feel like you really needed a ton of training on. Something like that, I feel like should have just been common sense to remove the child from the wall that he's banging his head against. That's neither here nor there. We've had another therapist where, we've had a couple therapists where they were just lazy. They kind of just sat there. They didn't really have much of, you could tell they didn't really have much of an interest in the job or even our kid. They just did the same kind of stuff over and over, and then they labeled it as them building rapport. So we've had lazy therapists come that we've had to let go of. We had one therapist where it didn't seem like she was going by what ABA goes by. We've had enough therapists to where I know their verbiage. I know that most times when a child is doing something that they shouldn't be doing, a therapist says, oh, no, thank you, or no, not this friend. They say certain things. This woman that came was just like, get down. Like, it was just the way that she says certain things that was very clear to me. Like, it made me think, are you new to this? Because don't talk to my child like that. That was immediately like my reaction. Me telling my child to get down and you as a therapist telling my child, especially the tone that you use, I don't like that. Don't talk to my child like that. It was certain things that she did. Like I said, we've gone through quite a bit of therapists. Some therapists we've gone through didn't last past 2 weeks. When Trey first started getting therapies, he didn't have a therapist that lasted longer than 2 weeks, which was sad because, he gets attached to somebody, or as soon as he starts getting used to somebody, then they're no longer on the case. And unfortunately, that happens often. The therapist that my kids currently have has been with us for over 2 years. Another therapist that my son had, she was with us for over a year. And some therapists that we've had before have become like family. I'm not saying at all that every ABA therapist out there is bad. We have came across some great ABA therapists. I can think of 4 off the top of my head that I have genuinely loved and that have become like family to us, that my kids have seen like family, that my actual family has seen like family. We see them so much, they actually do their job. We notice that our kids make progress with them. We love the way that they treat our kid, and we can tell by seeing them, their body language, their interaction, that they genuinely love this job. The differences that our kids have made is our kids have made a lot of progress from ABA. Not all families can agree on that because some families are against ABA, and if you are, that is absolutely okay. I have heard some families say that they're against it. We just do what works best for our family, because like I don't feel like ABA all in all is a terrible thing. Most people don't like it because they don't know, again, how much of the say so that they have. I'm one of those parents where with ABA, I have told companies before and therapists before, I'm not somebody that stops my kids STEM. I'm not stopping them from STEMming. I let them be who they are. I don't try to change them for who they are. If we're working on things like life skills, how to engage with other kids properly, how to avoid the meltdowns, how to redirect our emotions, if we're working on things like that, I'm absolutely fine with it. But anything that falls in the lines of if they're pacing, you stop them, or if they're just stimming, then you stop them. Me personally, I'm not a huge fan of that, especially if the stimming isn't hurting anybody. Um, Sometimes I have felt like in the past that therapy is used to change the child to be able to fit in with the world. And I'm not with that. I don't need to change my kid to fit in with the world. The world should adjust how they see people with special needs. That's just my opinion, though. Everybody may not feel that way. 3 boys still currently receive ABA therapy to this day for speech therapy. For speech therapy has been an experience. It's not as crazy as an experience with ABA, but there has been an experience with speech. For Trey, when he first started receiving speech, his speech therapist was not the greatest. That's the nicest way I could put it. She was not the greatest. I felt like the things that she worked on were very below his age. Granted, he did have a speech delay. He was very behind, but it seemed like she focused on things more like so for a baby, which I didn't really understand. Um, it was a lot of her having him watch videos, telling him to make a sound, and then she was on her phone. For some therapies, when your child gets a therapy outside of the home, whether it's like speech therapy or occupational therapy, physical therapy, for some companies, they do want the parent to sit outside the room. I make it known to every therapist, I don't trust nobody with my kids, and I don't know you. Therefore, I will feel more comfortable sitting in with my kid during the therapy session. I know how to sit there and not jump in, not get involved, not interfere with the program unless I'm seeing something that I don't like. But I sit there, I watch, observe. That's just all in all what I would do. So that was the first speech therapist that Trey had. Tyler had a speech therapist that was great. I do not think that they were a good fit for each other, but her as a speech therapist, she was great. She's very loving and gentle and kind. And she was a mom herself. So I loved her all in all, but I don't think that her and Tyler were a great fit for each other. But she did also work with Trey, and Trey made a lot of progress working with her. So sometimes it's not always the therapist. It could just be that the therapist and your child are just not a great fit for each other, and that's okay. During the time that Tyler first started getting speech therapy, around that time frame, my dad had passed away, and Tyler and my dad were very close. Tyler was only 2 at the time, so it's very hard to explain grief to a 2-year-old. So his response was he acted out in his behavior, and his behavior had no limits. It was everywhere. It wasn't just something that he did at home. It was out at therapies, wherever he was. That's just how it was. And it was for a very long time. So Tyler would have therapy sessions, and the entire time he was banging his head against the wall. He was trying to throw things, and she was pregnant. The therapist was pregnant. So it made me feel uncomfortable the way his behavior was. And me and her both agreed that maybe he's not ready for speech right now. At first, we were trying to see, if obviously the behavior was effect of him losing his grandfather, but we were trying to see if it was something that we could work through. She was even trying to give me tips on how to help him process it and grieve. But like I said, it's hard trying to grieve for yourself and then also trying to help your child grieve, especially at such a young age. So her and I both end up agreeing that now may not be the time for Tyler to have speech, so he was discharged. Maybe, I don't even want to say a year later, but some months down the line, he ended up getting back into therapy. He made very little progress. Tyler and both Tristan were kids that learned better and did better at home. Tyler was like a parrot. He repeated everything that he heard, everything that he seen. But as soon as he would get to speech therapy, he would go mute. He wouldn't say anything. And so for a while, his therapist thought he couldn't talk. But I don't know what it was. Tyler and speech therapy were just not a good fit. And the same thing goes for Tristan too. Tristan is somebody that learns better through songs, so speech therapy was not a good fit for him. She could get him to work if it involved a song and him singing, but if it involved anything really outside of that, he had no interest in it. So that didn't work. And like I said, sometimes it's not always the therapist. Sometimes two things just aren't a good fit for each other, whether it be the actual therapy within itself and the child, whether it be the therapist and the child, whatever it could be, it could just not work well together. Trey has had another therapist, actually last year, was it last year? I think it was last year. I was not a fan of. And I feel like if a new therapist is going to work with your child, if a therapist is getting a new client, right? Whether it's ABA, speech, OT, I feel like you should be reading up on that child's file right before you even meet that child. She met him, and for the first session, she didn't make it past one session with him because right after that session, I was like, yeah, you can't work with my kid. She didn't know he was nonverbal. She were expecting certain things out of him. The way she talked to him, I didn't like. So I was just like, yeah, this is not going to work. This is not going to be a great fit. At some point, I told her he has pica. At some point, he put one of the toys in his mouth. And I think she went to, grab his arm. It was like a plastic food toy. But she went to go grab him. And I told her, don't grab my son or I'm going to grab you. And after that, she was no longer working with him. OT is short for occupational therapy. Now, some people think that OT and PT, which is physical therapy, is the same thing. It is not. OT works mostly on fine motor skills and gross motor skills, kind of. So OT, they work mostly on things like being able to button something or zipping something up and down. Food therapy. Trey and Tristan have both had to receive food therapy. Tyler graduated from OT within a year. Trey had accomplished all his programs for OT. He was in occupational therapy for over a year. But because Trey is so delayed, there were a lot of things she couldn't do with him that he would understand. So she was like, let's see if he can make some more progress outside of therapy and then reevaluate him to possibly get him back in. Now, for context, all three of our boys have had the same occupational therapist. So Tyler was the first one to receive occupational therapy at a year old. I remember it took him 5 weeks just to jump on the trampoline because he was scared of the trampolines. They work on things like climbing, being able to scoop food up with a spoon, things like textures, whether it's kinetic sand, Play-Doh, slime, using the motion for these two fingers. So she may have slime and stick little tiny toys in them for Tristan or, Tyler, whoever to pick out. They work on things like that. For OT, my experience in a sense is kind of limited only because I've only worked with one therapist. At first, I wasn't a huge fan of her. Now, I love her. It didn't take me long before I was like, okay, I actually like her. I think that the difference with OT and ABA and what could be the main reason why I wasn't a huge fan of her at first, the difference with OT and ABA is that for ABA, they work on building a rapport first before doing programs. And with OT, they don't really do that. They just jump straight into the programs. And so for Tristan, if you saw my last video, I mentioned he didn't like being touched. For OT, you're having to do a lot of touching, a lot of guiding, a lot of hand over hand, and things like that. For her, it was more so, and she said it before too, for her, it was more so her having to actually get to know him, because you can't do the same thing with every kid. Just because Tyler may be super friendly and he's okay with the physical contact doesn't mean that another kid is. And so just because you're a therapist does not mean that you can't learn. And it's good when you do get a kid that makes you learn something new. So that has been our experience with OT in general. Those are things that they have worked on and still work on. They work on things also like vibrating motions, being able to tolerate like getting a haircut, or being able to tolerate like grooming as far as like nail clipping and things like that. That's something else that OT works on. There's a long list of things, but for the most part, those are the things that they work on within occupational therapy. That has been our experience with therapies. For ABA, like I said, I've had a lot more experience because I've gone through quite a few companies and quite a few therapists. Sometimes it's not even the issue with the therapist. Sometimes it's the issue with the higher ups. I'm somebody that I always focus my communication with the therapist more than I do the higher ups, because at the end of the day, the therapist is the one that's coming out to my home every day. The therapist is the one that my kid knows. The therapist is the one that you mostly build that rapport for. And I have always wanted a therapist to come to my house and feel comfortable. I don't want them to ever come and feel tense or it feel awkward. I want you to feel comfortable, because this is where you have to be at 5 days a week for hours at a time. So nobody wants to go to a job where they feel uncomfortable, especially when you're sitting at other people's houses. Sometimes I've had to speak up as far as programs that higher ups have put in for my kid to do, that I did not care for. I am quick to tell somebody if I feel like they're not doing their job, especially when it comes to my kid. I'm not biting my tongue. Those are the things that we have came across. A lot of times, unfortunately, with the companies, everybody likes to point a finger at somebody, especially when it's the higher ups. So a lot of times, the higher ups, I feel like, will throw the therapist, the behavioral therapist, just out there and throw them under the bus and just say, oh no, that's not what they're supposed to do. Or, you know, I feel like the higher ups always have each other's backs, and then they just throw the behavioral therapists out to the wolves. That's not every company. That has not been my experience with every company. But there has been a lot more times that I have felt that than there has been that I did not feel that way. So either way, this is just a reminder that if you are receiving therapies for your child, you do have a say-so. Don't let anybody tell you that you do not have a say-so. My favorite thing to tell them is when they say that, oh, your insurance recommends. My favorite thing to say is recommending does not mean a requirement. If I say we're not going to do this with my kid, if I say I'm not okay with A, B, and C, that's just that. We're not going to go back and forth with it. If I say they can't do it, if I say I'm not comfortable with that, if I say I don't want you to do it, they're not going to do it. So that's just that. Please don't forget how much of a say-so that you have. Please don't forget that I know that it can be intimidating, but just because insurance or your therapist might recommend something does not mean that's always right. But before you feel like automatically what they're saying is not right, actually listen to them and see if that's something that can help. I have received so much good advice from great therapists that I have loved in the past, that I have actually became friends with, even outside of therapy sessions. And they have been a huge help to my family and to my kids. So, like I said, don't forget to say so that you have. Don't forget to speak up. You are your child's biggest advocate. I'm going to go ahead and close out this video. If you want to find me outside of YouTube, you can find me on Instagram at _SlayByRay. And if you liked what you just saw and what you just heard, if you have any interest in my channel, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram, and I will see you guys on the next video. Bye.